Well, Craig, I'm super excited to talk to you about your book and your book writing journey and the impact that your book has had on your life, because I think you've got an incredibly unique story and I can't wait to share it with people. And we'd love to shine a spotlight on these. And I mean, I was blown away when we first talked. So I'm excited to share that with people.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. We had an amazing conversation the first time we chatted. We set the bar really high, so we got to like really try to hit that.
Yeah, I hope we can capture some of the magic we had in private and share it with everybody. So I want to start with sort of the pre-book version of yourself. Like, how did the idea come about that you might need to have written a book? You know, when did the kernel first enter your mind?
So this is going to be interesting, and it's going to give the audience a little bit of a crash course in my background. So I was an extremely successful enterprise account manager for a large technology firm. I sold all the stuff that makes the internet work. I made the worst choice of my life and defrauded our partner. And I was arrested by the FBI, sentenced to 2 years of federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, ordered to pay restitution in excess of $800,000.
Oh my God.
I started writing when I was in prison. That was actually the genesis of the book. You know, when I was a kid, I always wanted to write, but, I loved telling stories. I would tell stories to my friends, like we were fishing literally with like a stick with a string and bread on the hook, which worked remarkably well, by the way. But, you know, just telling like these outrageous stories, I always loved doing that. But the responsibilities of adulthood really drowned that out. And, you know, here I am in prison, and really my rock bottom, and pen and paper became an escape. It became therapy. It became needed.
So you started just writing for, I assume, like for yourself, not even really knowing where it was going.
That's absolutely right. So I was actually, we're going to get dark for a moment. I was suicidal. I was so consumed by shame for the choices that I had made, because I knew what I was doing was wrong. And I was so consumed by that, by the damage done, planning how I was going to take my own life. And I couldn't talk to anybody in prison about that, because I don't know if you mention suicide in prison, they lock you in solitary confinement. So I could not talk to any of my friends in prison. I met some really nice, caring people, but they might tell a guard. And then I find myself in solitary. Can't talk about it on the phone or email. Both of those are monitored. So I reached for those black and white composition notebooks. Yeah, those black and white composition notebooks that we used to use in school. And I'll never forget, I wrote 186 handwritten pages in 3 days.
Yeah. I mean, what an isolating, scary, like to be rock bottom and alone and not be able to share that with anybody is so painful. I thank God you had a notebook and you could externalize those ideas in some way and just process.
It really taught me one of the most powerful things about writing, which is getting what's inside out. And it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to get what is inside, what's building up, what is causing shame and anger and embarrassment and guilt and suicidal thoughts, just getting it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And as soon as you see it, you can start to have a dialogue with it that you can't necessarily have when it's in your own head.
Exactly. And when it's in your own head, it goes in circles. At least for me, it just, you know, it's just repeating the same things over and over and over again, getting it out now. And I'll kind of get back to answering your question a little bit. I wrote those 186 pages just to process. When I was done with it, I said, wait a second. I think I can do something with this. I think this can turn into something. And that's really the genesis of Blank Canvas.
Yeah. So it was exactly going to be my next question is when did writing for yourself as a practice, when did that turn into, oh, maybe this is a book? Did you share it with people? Did you just, you know, see the potential for impact? Like when did you turn that corner?
So I'm going to answer, did I share with people? I did share with people that I was writing, because they saw me sitting in the library like a crazy person, just head down for hours at a time, banging out those 186 pages. And they said, are you writing a book? And I said, yes, I am. And it's funny. I heard from a lot of people, they're like, yeah, good luck with that. You and everybody else in prison. So there wasn't a lot of encouragement. Yeah, it was not a lot of encouragement, but I had to keep going. And as I started transforming those 186 pages into what would eventually become Blank Canvas, I'll never forget. I was sitting there, I was writing about getting arrested by the FBI. I was writing about getting divorced, being financially ruined, all of these things that really hurt, that were fresh, that stung. I mean, and just brought up all of that shame. So consumed by all the shame, writing about all these things that were so fresh and so new. Who the heck is going to read this thing? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to get an agent. I don't know how to get a publisher. I don't know any of this stuff. I'm in prison. I'm torturing myself by writing all of this. And I threw my pen and I go, why the hell am I doing this? And my heart spoke, and it spoke crystally clear. And for the record, it's the same heart that told me thousands of times not to commit the fraud. But this time I was not going to ignore it. And it said, you're doing this. I flipped the page in those black and white composition notebooks, and I wrote the answer. It said, you're doing this to help one person. That was it. And then I realized, here I am in prison at my rock bottom, consumed by shame. And what I'm writing can actually be of service to somebody else. It was very empowering. That's when it really took off. And that was at this point, 10 years ago. That is still the fuel that gets me up in the morning, is I do what I do to help one person.
So 10 years out from that. And how many years has it been since you published the book?
It was 21. So 3 years.
3 years. Okay. So 3 years out from publishing your book, do you feel like you have reached that one person? Do you know you've done that?
I have. And what's really funny is I had beta readers, for that first draft, for the fifth draft, and I had one beta reader who read it through every iteration that I was willing to share with her. And she was unbelievable. She helped really mold the book. But after the first draft, I said to her, I said, my goal with this was to help one person. And she goes, I got to tell you, I'm going through a breakup right now. And she's like, your book has helped me. And we were walking in Brooklyn. We were outside. It was a beautiful day. And I went, I went with my hands. I go, job done. I helped one person. Let's call it quits.
Before you even published. Yeah.
Before I even published, I was like, wow, I accomplished my goal. And then I kind of transformed that into it's the one person at a time times a lot of people. And so there's been so many instances of people reaching out, whether it's a spouse who died and Blank Canvas helped them process that, breakups, people who were suicidal, who weren't suicidal after reading it, really humbling moments.
That's incredible. I was going to ask, I mean, I'm sure it's tough to choose from what must be a whole series of very powerful conversations and cathartic moments, but do you have any like standout kind of biggest moments of celebration or high points?
Absolutely. So part of my business now is I'm a speaker, and I've been really fortunate where I've shared the stage with the FBI, the Secret Service, state secretaries, some really high, powerful people. Well, I was invited to speak at my aunt's book club. My aunt is in her 70s. I know that some of the ladies in the book club are in their 80s. And that scared the bejesus out of me, because I have such a reverence for people of that age, because I know that they just have a collected wisdom that comes from that. I know my aunt is sharp as a whip, and I know her friends are the same way. So here I am coming off of sharing the stage with the FBI, and I'm paranoid about going to a book club with my aunt and her friends. We meet at a woman's house. We're sitting at the dining room table, and we had a nice lunch, and then it was the Q&A. And we're sitting there, and I got grilled by a few people. They definitely threw me into the fire. And then this one woman who was probably in her mid-80s or so, very frail, very soft-spoken. She raised her hand, and I said, yes, what would you like to say? And she said, I lost my husband 4 months ago. I had a stroke 3 months ago. I thought my life was over. And everybody is leaning forward because they can't quite hear her because she's so soft-spoken. And she said, your book showed me that I have a second chance. your book gave me hope. That was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had in my entire life. It took all of my willpower to not start crying in front of everybody. Honestly, I was so touched that she would share that, and so amazed that our words can have that impact.
That's such a good story, man. And it encapsulates the experience that I think thousands of authors have, which is going in thinking these high thoughts about, I'm going to sell a bunch of books, I'm going to get on a big stage, I'll see my name in lights. And so many times the true stories of people's highest moments are these small whispers that are just so meaningful, of like, you've changed the trajectory of someone's life on a very personal level.
It is, we connect via our stories. So this woman has no idea what it's like to go to federal prison, but she knows what losing everything feels like. She knows what shame feels like. She knows what loss feels like. She knows all of that. And that's, our stories are the vehicles for our shared universal emotions. And that is what is so unbelievably powerful about sharing our stories. And I'll share really quickly. So when I was in corporate, I'd close multi-million-dollar deals and I'd be totally pumped. This moment in the dining room with this woman trumps that feeling of closing a multi-million-dollar deal by 1,000-fold. Nothing can hold a candle to that.
I have to ask, like, because it's always a struggle to get people to really, like, bleed on the page and open themselves up as truly and honestly and openly as you can, because that's how you have those moments of true connection, is just really like tearing your chest open. And I feel like you've done that with Blank Canvas and with your story, because it wasn't born as a, hey, I'm going to tell my story. It was born as like, I just have to externalize these thoughts. Have you had a moment's regret since you overcame that fear of like putting your rawest self out onto the page?
What an interesting question. And nobody's ever asked me this before. So what comes up for me is, I was planning how I was going to take my own life because of shame. And I realized that shame lives and breathes in the dark. And what do we do with something that lives and breathes in the dark? We turn the light on. And my way of turning the light on was externalizing that story of bleeding on the page. And so I knew I had to do that for my own healing. But let's go back to that one person. That first draft of Blank Canvas, it didn't even scratch the surface of my skin. And I knew that. And I said, if I don't own my story, it's going to own me for the rest of my life. And if I don't own my story, I cannot effectively help that one person. So the next draft, I cut deeper. The next draft, I cut deeper. And I kept going until I felt that I was empty. And I can't possibly think of something that I would regret about that, because it was the most challenging. I mean, I had to put myself back into the courtroom on sentencing. I had to put myself back in the room, and my wife at the time told me she was leaving me. I had to physically feel everything as though it was happening in real time. So it was unbelievably painful, but that's where my healing came from. And that, to what you were saying before, is, I believe, where we get that connection with others, is we have to. And so there's nothing I can regret about that. It's been beautiful. And I'm trying to do it on my second book.
Wow. Incredible. So what's, is it? I believe the second book is the run up to, like, the Blank Canvas, your first book, is about sort of starting at rock bottom. And your second book is going to be like how you got there in the first place.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's going to be a bit of a prequel, and tentatively it's called You're Going the Wrong Way: Letters to My Younger Self. And I really just want to talk to that version of myself that was heading down that path, and let him know what actually is important in life. Friends, family, freedom, creativity, all these things that actually don't cost anything. And how, at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with luxury items and nice things, but they're devoid of meaning. They really are. And what matters is what we're talking about here, even this conversation. having this sense of meaning and fulfillment and connecting with somebody else, and hopefully connecting you and I with an audience, and having them go, I'm going to write my story. That's powerful.
Yeah. And you can have the same sort of beautiful catharsis preventing people from hitting their rock bottom, just like steering them away from the cliff, rather than that you have with your first book of helping lift them up once they've fallen. What an incredible like combination of stories to have and people to reach and moments to be able to speak to.
It is, for me, what's coming up is I don't think a lot of people are going to necessarily go the direction I did in prison. But when we start realizing that we're not living authentically and we're out of alignment, and, our job that we thought was going to give us that meaning and that fulfillment, and it's not, we climb that top of the mountain, we look around and go, what the heck? And everything I was promised isn't here. We can start looking into addictions. We can start looking into affairs, just kind of escapes to make the pain go away. That's the person I really want to talk to. It is somebody who is on the verge of, maybe not going to prison, but making a bad life choice. And that there's a different, and we think it's so hard, but it's not. There's a different path.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm excited to see this second book. I think there's a wide gulf for people who have not been through the experience of going from I think I have a story. I think I have something to share. I think I have something to help people with. And then there's a huge gulf between that and, a first draft, a manuscript, something that starts to feel like a book. And you had that sort of torn out of you in a very like visceral sense. So maybe it felt easy to you to bridge that gulf. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it was a battle through all those drafts. But do you have sort of, what's your advice from someone who's crossed that gap to somebody who has the feeling that they have something to share, but don't know how to make it across that first big leap?
That is, first off, if you think you have a story to share, you have a story to share. We all do. And there's somebody out there that can benefit from your story. So holding it inside helps no one. So you got to get it out. And I would lean on Hemingway for this. When he would get stuck writing, he said something along the lines of, write one true sentence, followed by another, followed by another. That helped me in those moments I had to get blank canvas out, but it helped me in those moments where I was fully stuck. I would just write one true sentence followed by another. And I would say that to the person who is standing on the edge of that cliff, not necessarily willing to take that leap into writing. Write one true sentence with this caveat. Right now, nobody else is going to read it. Don't worry about the outcome. Don't worry about being judged. Don't worry about being criticized, critiqued, or whatever it may be. This is for you, and you're getting it out. Get that first draft out. Once you get that first draft out, any of those doubters are like, who are you to write a book? Well, I already did. First draft's out there.
Yeah, I love that. It's a good reminder. Like, if you sit down mentally to write a book, you feel like you're already on stage. And the truth of it is, like, you sit in a corner of a room and you start writing for just yourself. And people opt into a book. You're not performing, and you're certainly not performing from your first draft. You just need to start collecting. I love that. Start collecting true sentences. Write one after the other, and see where you get. Just start that process.
And I would also say really quickly, start the process, but also let go of that outcome. Enjoy the journey. I mean, it's not a cliche to say that the destination is the journey. Enjoy that.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic prompt for another question, which is like, how did you transform through the process of writing? Not even talking about publishing, not even talking about sharing it with anybody, but like through that first draft, that 15th draft, just the experience of moving towards a book, like the creative transformation. Let's isolate that part.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, this is where a lot of that deep inner work that I did starting in prison to get to actually holding the finished copy came in. So I lacked self-trust. because I made terrible choices that landed me in prison. So I became very afraid of making the simplest of choices. What am I going to eat for dinner? What workout am I going to do today? I had no self-trust. And self-trust to me is not the faith that everything's going to work out okay. Self-trust is the deep inherent wisdom. Regardless of how a situation turns out, I know I'll be okay. Big difference. I may fall flat on my face, but I know I'm going to be okay long term. And when we know that, we're willing to take more of those creative risks. We're able to keep cutting deeper and deeper. And so part of the way I built that self-trust was making and keeping commitments to myself. So I became the man who did what he said he was going to do. I committed to writing 2 hours every single day. That was a non-negotiable for me. I built my life around those 2 hours. And so each time I showed up at the keyboard, I'm building that self-trust. Each time I cut deeper, I rely on that self-trust to be able to do it. That if I am in the future judged or critiqued or, this guy's way too vulnerable or, whatever it may be, it's going to sting, but I'm going to be okay. And that to me was a huge part of that creative journey. That was that transformation to first word written in prison to holding the hardcover that came from you guys, which was unbelievably amazing, and holding it and being like, I'm the guy who took a spark of an idea that I had to get out, but I turned it into a tangible thing. That's the journey.
Yeah. You sent me that, your unboxing video when you first cracked that box of your first print of books open. And it was just so like, I love those videos in general, but yours was particularly like emotional. You could see on your face, like the impact that it had to just reach that milestone of something that had such raw and humble beginnings and had come so far.
I think that's, back to that person who was thinking about writing and is feeling a little bit stuck. It doesn't really matter where we start. I think that's another key thing. Blank Canvas didn't have the greatest beginnings. It started in a federal prison library, but it's where we're going and where we end up. That's what's critical to it. It doesn't matter where we begin. We may not know what the heck we're doing, but we're doing it and we're learning, we're building that trust.
Yeah, I think I was just talking to someone about this yesterday. Authors have this feeling like they need the perfect idea in order to get started. And it's very much a case of like the action reveals information. Like you just have to start and the idea emerges through the work. And the only important thing really, like it's not like you sit down one day and make one decision to write a book. Writing a book is 1,000 decisions to not give up. You just keep going. Just keep going.
I'm going to steal that. That's brilliant.
Steal it. So the other chasm that I think that you've crossed, that a lot of authors, or maybe prospective authors sort of look to published authors for help with is just understanding how to go from, hey, I have a manuscript or I have a draft of a manuscript. I've got a Word doc. I've got a book idea to a published book that's out there in the world. So how did you go from, hey, I've got a manuscript that I feel really good about to, all right, I've got a carton of books. It's out there in the world. How did you navigate that decision? What were the approaches you considered? What were the trade-offs you felt like you had to make?
So when I had that finished manuscript that I felt comfortable going out with, around that time, I actually had dinner with the former producer of the James Altucher podcast and the author Amy Morin. And Amy, amazing person. I told her what I wanted to do, that I wanted to do speaking. And she said, you should go the traditional route. It'll actually be a little bit better for you in the long term. And I was like, okay. So I started going down that route and didn't know what the heck I was doing. I'm querying agents and doing all this stuff and I'm getting no responses. I'm getting rejections. But I started thinking about that one person. I said, you know what? Me trying to do this way is not helping that one person. I know that James Altucher is a huge proponent of self-publishing. So I reached out to him to ask for some help. He ended up having me as a guest on his podcast. And I said, I'm going to go self-publishing. And I just dove headfirst into that. And I knew that he was a fan of Scribe. And I also knew that I looked at the publishing imprint of a couple of my favorite books, and they were done by Scribe. And that just became a no-brainer for me to just say, okay, this is what I'm doing. And I'm burning the boats on trying to get it professionally published. I'm going all in on this. And I believe so fully in the self-publishing model. And so it was a big chasm, but I think things are only as complex as we choose to make them. And when we kind of take the massive and break it down into the simple and start realizing, what is it that I want? I want to get it out in the world. What is the best vehicle I think that is available for me to do that? That's what led me there.
Yeah. I was going to ask why did self-publishing become so clear, so obvious to you as your route?
It was ownership of the process, ownership of the book. I like that, a bit of autonomy, and just knowing that traditional publishing, I don't think it doesn't have the gravitas necessarily that it once had, unless you're one of those like top 20 writers, where the publisher is really going to back you 100%. I heard somebody else say this one time, they're called book publishers. They're not called book marketers. You're still, if you're not one of those like top 20, Michael Lewis or Malcolm Gladwell type of people, you're still responsible for marketing your book. I said, why am I going to let somebody else handle all that stuff when I can do it?
When you're going to end up having to do it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I might as well do it this way. I don't see me ever not self-publishing, honestly. I enjoy it that much. I mean, if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, we've got, a big publisher, I would sit down and have a conversation with them. I'm not naive, but I'd still be like, what do you have to offer?
So tell me about the experience of going through that self-publishing process. Was it easier or harder? What were the most fun parts? What was the surprises either way?
So I'll start with the surprise. A surprise was how much of a science publishing a book is, how actually in depth and how complex publishing a book is. I naively thought that, and this is going to sound, it's silly, but it's my truth, that you write a bunch of stuff, you throw it in between two covers, and it's done. The interior has to be designed in a specific way so that everything lands on the right page. I mean, I was shocked by all of that, how things are laid out on the cover, people do judge a book by its cover. That saying exists for a reason, but the science behind it, that is what surprised me. The process was terrifying because it was unknown. And I'm going to give you guys a big plug. Scribe made the unknown known. And so it wasn't frightening. Once I started realizing what the process was and how it actually worked, and that science that was a surprise actually became a bit of the certainty. We do this, then we do this, then we do that, then we do that. And I just was like, this is so structured. It's perfect. That was my experience through it was one of the best professional experiences I've ever had, honestly.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you for publishing with us. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad that you felt so well stewarded, well shepherded, through that process. That's been my experience as an author too. That's why I joined the company. I think it's such a powerful thing to have a strong, clear, professional guide through that very windy, scientific, detail-oriented publishing journey. It takes a lot of different experts from a lot of different disciplines to get everything to come out feeling like one of those books that comes out of a top-tier publisher. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of coordination.
Writing a book is a massive endeavor, as you know, as so many people. It's a massive endeavor. And what you're actually doing when that thing gets published, you are putting yourself out there to be seen and heard and understood. I believe that is one of our most innate desires as human beings to be seen, heard, and understood. I also think it is one of our deepest fears, which is why we have to do it. We have to move towards that. I bring this up because working with Scribe, I felt seen, heard, and understood through the process. I was understood that this was my baby. I had put my all into this thing, and to be seen and heard and understood that I'm scared. I don't know what's happening. I want this thing to be amazing. That I felt every step of the journey. And it's really important.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for publishing this story. Thank you for overcoming such an enormous fear of exposing, so much of yourself and providing such an example for people that they could connect with. I'm really quite proud that like this company was able to support you, support this book, help you get this story out in a professional way, and enable everything that you're doing now. I think it's so important and so rewarding to see the impact that you're able to have, and the career that you're able to have, and the sort of the beautiful like resurgence you're able to create out of such a challenging position. Like I admire the persistence and the perseverance and the courage that it takes to do something like that. Very grateful to be working with you and supporting you and to have your work out there in the world. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for helping me do all of that. So I can't extend enough gratitude.
Yeah, we exist to enable people like you to create connections like this. And I'm very excited to play a role in your next book, and hopefully you stay addicted and keep writing after that.
Oh, I don't see myself ever stopping writing. I enjoy it way too much. That 2 hours a day is still happening. So it's just now organizing the thoughts and getting all the books out. I want to get to that point of like one every 2 years, because Blank Canvas took me about 6. So I need to tighten that up a little bit.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I don't know if you had the experience. Once I went through the full publishing process once, I felt such a fog lift, and I felt so excited to go run that maze a second time, because I felt like I knew I would make it through. What was uncertain became certain. I knew I had help along the way. I knew how to do it. And I was like, oh my God, like that was so rewarding to do once. I can't wait to do it again. And I feel even more confident, like climbing this mountain again. Like, let's get after it. And I sense that energy in you too. Am I right?
Once we've been somewhere, we know how to get back there. And that's exactly it. It's like, okay, and it makes the creative process a little bit easier because you don't have that uncertainty anymore. It's like, oh, okay, I know what all that publishing is like. I don't have to worry about that right now. Let's put all the mental bandwidth into creating the best book that I possibly can.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to another buddy who's just publishing his second book, and he's like, all right, now that I published my second one, I feel like I can really just focus on becoming a great writer. And I was like, how many authors like have that conversation, but how far does that feel from so many people stuck at the very beginning, feeling like they have to become a great writer to even start writing their first book?
I can't thank you enough for sharing that. So I journal every morning, and part of that journaling, I do self-coaching. I actually will take some of my coaching knowledge and turn it on myself. I dedicate, sound funny, but 12 minutes every morning to doing that. And it's just like this rapid self-coaching. And I was going through what I envision for my life, what my goals are, what my dreams are, and really going kind of big with it. And I wrote, so what is that going to enable you to do? And it's not, the house on the ocean. It's not the Ferrari in the garage. I literally wrote, it's going to allow me to master the craft of writing and speaking.
You clearly have natural gifts at both. I can't wait to see you speak. I from our first conversation was blown away by your storytelling and your story and your courage and your generosity. And I thank you again for taking the time to share that with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on. And again, incredible conversation. So grateful we connected.